Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals on Gran Turismo, but this particular installment of Rivals is a little bit different because this is our first ever Rivals match on Gran Turismo Sport. This is an important episode of the series, and we're pitting three vehicles which we've reviewed individually over the previous 3 weeks in a head-to-head battle. Now, I alluded to this yesterday in the review episode for the Jaguar F-Type Group 3 race car. And this battle is between three British GT cars. And we are going to be doing other rivalries on Gran Turismo Sport over coming weeks as well. But for now, we've got the Aston Martin Vantage GT3 car, the Jaguar F-Type Group 3 car, the fictional race car, and the McLaren 650S GT3 car. So, as we always do, we're going to break down each car individually with a short review of what it's like as an overall package and how it compares specifically to the other two rivals, and then, as we always do, we'll break down the actual numbers to find out which one wins, at least for the fun of it, on paper. Kicking us off, first of all, we have the Aston Martin Vantage GT3 race car, and we reviewed this one 2 weeks ago in the GT Masters series, and incidentally there are links to all three of these cars, more in-depth reviews in the video description down below. But, in essence, this vehicle is for those of us who like to be different from the crowd. You're not necessarily just there to win, you're there to do it in style. That's the kind of offering that something like an Aston Martin race car, or a Bentley race car, or a Morgan race car, or something like a Spiker race car, that's what they offer. They have similar performance, sometimes not as good, sometimes equal, sometimes better to other cars on the grid, but they're the left field choice. They're not the expected vehicle. They're not necessarily even the big dogs. Sometimes they might be, but that's not necessarily a requirement from the fans. Because if you're looking purely to dominate the pack under most circumstances, if not all circumstances, then it's pretty obvious which vehicles you're going to go for. You're going to choose stuff like Vipers, Corvettes, GTRs, those vehicles which have a strong track record in multiple motorsport series, and also aren't just based around one generation. In the case of something like a GTR, for instance, it has a strong motorsport lineage, and it's just got better and better over the years, and they've drawn from that experience. Now, of course, a company like Aston Martin will do the same thing, but they always have that style edge to them, whereas something like a GTR doesn't go in for that at all. It's a pure, total weapon. Now, with that being said, I was personally surprised how the Vantage finished in comparison to the two other cars, at least with me driving, and of course on this particular Nordschleife circuit. So we'll find out how it compared in just a moment, but for now, let's consider the McLaren. Now, the McLaren 650S is, of course, our first race car review for Gran Turismo Sport about 3 weeks ago now, and it's a vehicle which you go into expecting a lot from. You have high expectations from it because it's a McLaren. They have a strong motorsport lineage in a similar way to how we just mentioned from stuff like Nissan, but they have a modern resurgence, if you will. They have a lineup which is bigger than it's ever been before in terms of McLaren road cars, and they just keep getting better and faster and superior around the track with every new generation. The P1 GTR, of course, recently broke a Nordschleife record, and various other vehicles are among the quickest street cars you can buy, like the 650S, the 570S, and even the P1 in standard form. Standard being a relative term, is one of the quickest cars you can buy. As far as this particular race car, though, it's not necessarily as dominant as you might expect. Now, obviously you don't want one car to be better than everything else by too much in a particular class, but the McLaren could very easily be that way. But that's not how it turns out. In fact, it's actually not the quickest of these three cars. It was the slowest. Now, I wasn't trying to make it the slowest, I was pushing all three cars, and doubtless with different drivers you would have different results. But it's interesting to see that that is the way it turned out for me. So finally then, how does the only fictional car of the three the Jaguar compare? Well, the Jaguar, which we of course reviewed specifically yesterday in GT Masters as well, is the car that has the least to live up to. Because yes, it's a Jaguar, they have motorsport history, they've won at the Le Mans, various other racing exploits, and of course the brand has fans that you want to please. But the fact that the car isn't real, the F-Type of course is, but this car isn't, means that you instantly don't have that load to bear on the vehicle. The fans can just take whatever they get and enjoy it for that, in a similar way to something like the Subaru Impreza Super Touring Car, or the Mitsubishi FTO Super Touring Car, the Polyphony Digital Originals, which turn out to be amazing because, although they're not real cars, the fans are surprised by how good they turn out to be. And that's the funny thing about this Jaguar, at least from my perspective and from what I've seen so far. This is a car that you can go into without any real expectations, because it's not a real vehicle and it doesn't have any real racing exploits to live up to. So whatever you get from the car, in effect, is a bonus. Now, as it turns out, and again we touched on this yesterday in the review for it, is that it's actually got some of the strongest numbers on paper of the whole Group 3 class. And that's pretty impressive. And, as you can see from the lap time on screen, it was the quickest of the three. And of course there are a number of variables involved. The driver, the track, the tuning. But at least on this occasion, with me driving, the Jaguar was the quickest. And the funny thing is, and I also hinted at this yesterday, the car is quicker than it feels. It's deceptively quick. The handling is somewhere between the ferocity of the McLaren and the smoothness of the Aston, but in the case of this car, the result is perfect for what it needs to be. It makes it faster than you would expect it to be. So with that being said, and with the Jaguar being the quickest of the three on this occasion, how do they compare on paper? Well, as you break down the numbers of the three vehicles, there are some ways in which this rivals match is going to be different, and basically any rivals match based around the beta is also going to be different in these ways, such as price. We do usually give the cars points based on which one is the most affordable, but of course none of the cars currently have confirmed prices, so in effect there are no points given out. However, if all three cars are the same regardless, you could give them no points, or you could give them all the point. So let's just have fun with it and give them all a point, because they're all the same, for now. Of course, in the future that will doubtless change. Likewise, as far as the vehicle class, they are all, of course, GR3 or Group 3 vehicles, and so, again, you don't really need to give any particular car a point as you would with a PP system, because that just doesn't apply on this game. So again, I'm going to give all three cars a courtesy point, because I can. And it's now that we start to see the differences, because we're now getting into the numbers that actually do change. First up, we have the engine size. Now, of course, all things considered, the biggest engine is not necessarily the best engine. Rotary engines are a perfect example of that. But for any who are new to this series, and chances are some of you are, the way we run this is basically top trump style. It's purely for the fun of it. Any car can win, any car can lose. It doesn't really mean anything in the long run. It's purely for fun. So, biggest is best, logic, unless it's weight, of course, and so, by that logic, the Aston Martin gets the point. And in fact, it's quite a lot bigger than the McLaren. The Jaguar we're not told about, but you can surmise it's probably based on the road-going engine, and if it is, the Aston is still bigger. As far as power though, as I alluded to earlier on, the Jaguar, without balance of performance being applied, that is, in the garage, is actually the most powerful. The McLaren and the Aston are fairly close to each other, around 540, 550, but the Jaguar is way up around 580, which is a significant basic advantage to have. As far as torque as well, it is the winner by, again, a big margin. Both of the others are well under 500 foot-pounds. In fact, the Aston Martin is barely over 400, whereas the Jaguar is far higher than 500, 526. And, of course, the fact that it's supercharged helps it in that regard. As far as weight, though, the Jaguar doesn't win. It's exactly the same as the Aston, as you can see, at 1,200 kilos, and that gives the McLaren an edge of just 10 kilos. But that 10 kilos is still enough to give it a much-needed point. And as far as horsepower per tonne, even though the McLaren is lighter, the sheer power advantage that the Jaguar has is still enough to give it a significant victory over the other two, which again are very close to each other at 459 and 455 respectively. And interestingly, although it's not awarded a point, and pretty much never is in Rivals battles, because as I mentioned earlier, there are too many variables involved, it is interesting to note that the third quickest, or last in other words, was the McLaren, ironically enough, with a 654.7. Then comes the Aston Vantage with a 653.4, and then in first place, the F-Type with a 652.2. So not a huge gap between them, especially given the size of the circuit, and on a smaller track or a different track, you could definitely get different results. But overall, which one then is our winner? Well, if you factor in those courtesy points which all three cars got, in other words, those first 2 points don't really make any difference at all, that means that coming in joint second place with 3 points apiece are both the Aston Martin Vantage and the McLaren 650S, but coming in first with 5 points is the Jaguar. And the significant points to its favour are power, torque, and horsepower per tonne, whereas with the McLaren it has the weight advantage, and with the Aston Martin it has the capacity advantage. Very interesting to see how the cars fall, and the fact that the Jaguar is fictional, of course, allowed Polyphony more creative license to give it those numbers. But, as I said, all three cars are brilliant, and this isn't designed to be taken as the be-all and end-all of how the cars compare, and all three are brilliant in their own way and can certainly give you victories. But that's it overall for this particular Rivals match. As I said earlier on, you should stick around on the channel because we will be doing more Rivals matches on Gran Turismo Sport, as well as individual reviews and overall reviews and various other things as well. But for now, I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.